You remember the morning the announcement broke, because it wasn't just news. It was a rupture in something millions of people thought was safe, predictable, and part of their daily rhythm. It was November 29, 2017, when viewers tuned in to NBC Yes Today expecting the usual comfort of Matt Lauer as familiar cadence. Instead, they were met with a somber tone, co-hosts struggling to keep their composure, and the stunning declaration that the network had terminated Lauer, effective immediately. The reason was serious and impossible to ignore: a detailed complaint alleging inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace. In the quiet of that morning, trust fractured. The polished smile that had greeted households for decades was suddenly tied to whispers of misconduct, and the myth of the untouchable morning star came crashing down. Welcome to 102 Hours. You and I spend these late moments wandering through stories where power, crime, and scandal intertwine with public memory. The lights are dim here, and the pace is unhurried. If this is your first time joining, take a deep breath and let the words come to you slowly. These stories are told gently, with care for those who were harmed, and without sensationalism, because the truth is often unsettling enough. If you'd like to spend more evenings here, consider subscribing. It's a simple way to keep this shared ritual alive. And if you want, drop your location and local time in the comments. There's always something strangely comforting about seeing where listeners are tuning in from. A reminder that even as we explore difficult truths, you're never truly alone. For years, Matt Lauer had been woven into the fabric of American mornings. Since the late 1990s, he wasn't just a newsman. He was a household presence, a voice that blended cheer with authority, guiding you through breaking headlines, celebrity interviews, and moments of national crisis. From Rockefeller Plaza, the energy of the crowds waving homemade signs wasn't just about the show. It was about him, the figure people trusted to make sense of the day. He was the face of NBC, one of the highest-paid figures in broadcast journalism, a star whose fame rivaled that of many actors he interviewed. Yet, as you sit with the memory, you realize that the same platform that lifted him so high became the stage for his fall. What makes the moment unforgettable is its suddenness. There had been no slow drip of rumor in the press, no weeks of speculation. NBC's statement landed like a thunderclap, swift, definitive, and public. Viewers felt blindsided, because just the day before, Lauer had been there, smiling, interviewing, joking, guiding the ship of morning television as he always had. To see him vanish overnight left a sense of whiplash. It wasn't only the loss of a familiar figure, it was the disorienting feeling that someone you let into your home daily may have been hiding a darker side all along. NBC executives later said the decision came after a female employee filed a formal complaint describing misconduct during the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics. That account was serious enough to trigger immediate action, and the network insisted it was the first time they had received such a detailed report against Lauer. Yet within days, additional women stepped forward, their allegations stretching back years, painting a picture that was difficult to ignore. And investigators still question whether it was truly the first time the network had heard whispers, or whether the weight of public scrutiny forced a reckoning that had long been postponed. The contrast was stark. Out front, Lauer projected the image of a devoted professional, a calm presence during chaotic events like 9/11 or Hurricane Katrina, and a man who could just as easily laugh with celebrities as he could interview presidents. Behind the scenes, however, stories began to emerge of power imbalances, of a workplace culture that allowed certain stars to operate above accountability. NBC's studio at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, once a symbol of bright mornings, now carried the shadow of suspicion. There's a quirky detail that makes the irony sting even more. Lauer, known for his obsessive attention to timing, once insisted that the studio clocks be calibrated to match his internal rhythm exactly. Producers humored him, creating an environment where even the smallest seconds bent around his presence. In hindsight, it feels symbolic, an empire shaped to his comfort, his power unquestioned, until suddenly it wasn't. For viewers, the scandal shattered more than a single man's reputation. It shook confidence in institutions, in media giants who claimed to value trust while perhaps ignoring warning signs. It forced uncomfortable conversations about how much power television stars really wield, and what happens when that power is abused. As you think about it now, you feel the layers of betrayal, the disappointment in Lauer, the unease with NBC, and the recognition that victims had carried pain in silence while audiences at home were offered polished smiles. The morning star fell swiftly, but the echoes stretched far. Newspapers blared headlines, social media burned with debate, and in living rooms across the country, people argued over whether they could separate the man from the work. For some, it was just another scandal in a long line of celebrity downfalls. But for many, it was deeply personal. Because Matt Lauer wasn't just famous. He was familiar. His voice was part of the way you woke up, the way you learned the news, the way you began your day. Losing that illusion felt like losing a ritual. And so, you're left with a question that will guide our journey. How does someone rise so high, embody trust for millions, and then collapse almost overnight? The story of Matt Lauer isn't just about one man. It's about the fragile boundary between public image and private reality, about institutions that shield power, and about what happens when the truth finally breaks through. Tonight, you and I begin at that breaking point. The morning when a star crashed, and the world began to see the shadows behind the smile. You rewind the tape, back before the scandal, before the headlines cracked open a story of power and abuse. To understand the fall, you have to trace the rise, the climb of a man who became one of the most familiar faces in American media. Matt Lauer didn't start as a household name. In fact, his early career was a patchwork of smaller television gigs, local news, lifestyle segments, and even the occasional on-camera role that leaned more on charm than gravitas. Born in 1957 in New York City, he cut his teeth in broadcasting with a blend of ambition and persistence. He moved through stations like an eager apprentice, learning how to handle the teleprompter, the tension of live television, and the art of making strangers feel like they were being spoken to directly. By the late 1980s, his name was floating around in television circles. He was tall, clean-cut, and skilled at threading the line between friendly and authoritative. That made him an easy fit for morning programming, a genre that thrives on warmth but demands professionalism. NBC executives noticed him. They tested his chemistry with other hosts, gauged audience reactions, and found what they were looking for: someone who could embody both neighborly comfort and journalistic presence. That combination, rare and highly marketable, eventually launched him into the orbit of the Today Show. His rise wasn't meteoric, but steady. By 1994, Lauer was subbing for main hosts, sliding into the chair with the ease of someone who looked as though he'd been there forever. 3 years later, in 1997, NBC gave him the coveted title, co-anchor of Today. Suddenly, the man who once floated through regional programs was waking up America. And not just a small part of it. Millions tuned in daily. He became the voice behind their first cup of coffee, the smile that greeted them before school runs and commutes, the figure who felt like a guest in their kitchen every weekday morning. It's worth remembering how central morning television was in that era. This was before the endless scroll of Twitter or the ping of push notifications. For many, their first sense of the world as events came from the flickering TV in the corner of the room. Lauer thrived in that space. He had an almost uncanny ability to switch gears. One moment laughing with a celebrity, the next pivoting to a grim, breaking story. When the September 11th attacks unfolded, Lauer was one of the anchors guiding viewers through the unimaginable, his calm voice steady in the chaos. For many, his delivery became synonymous with reliability. NBC recognized the gold mine. They poured resources into Today, turning it into a cultural engine. The plaza outside 30 Rockefeller Center became a stage for crowds waving signs, singing along to live music, and straining to catch a glimpse of the hosts. And always at the center of that energy was Lauer, shaking hands, cracking jokes, guiding the spectacle. Ratings soared. His contracts ballooned to tens of millions of dollars. At his peak, he was reportedly earning more than $20 million annually, making him one of the highest-paid news personalities in the world. There's a quirky tidbit tucked in entertainment lore that highlights just how central he became. Producers once joked that the studio's clocks ticked on Lauer time because he was so precise about pacing that everything, camera cuts, commercial breaks, even coffee refills, bent to his internal rhythm. The show didn't just have an anchor, it had an orbit, and everyone else revolved around him. But power carries shadows. Behind the gleam of the lights and the roar of the plaza crowds, colleagues occasionally described him as exacting, even cutting. He could make careers, or stall them, with a word. Assistants and junior staff sometimes felt the weight of his influence. While none of these observations amounted to scandal in those years, they hinted at an atmosphere where one man's approval dictated the tone of the workplace. Investigators still question whether those early murmurs were simply personality quirks or subtle warnings of a deeper imbalance. At home, his image seemed equally polished. Married to Annette Roque, with whom he had 3 children, Lauer projected the image of a family man, balancing public life with private devotion. Photographs of them together appeared in glossy magazines, reinforcing the illusion of balance and stability. Viewers could imagine that the man smiling on their TV screens at dawn returned each evening to a peaceful domestic life. And then there were the lighter, almost theatrical moments. The annual Where in the World is Matt Lauer series, where he traveled to far-flung corners of the globe, from the Great Wall of China to remote jungles. Viewers delighted in seeing him out of the studio, wind in his hair, laughing in unexpected places. It was a clever branding exercise. Matt Lauer wasn't just a newsman, he was an adventurer, a trusted companion even when exploring the unknown. By the mid-2000s, he was, without exaggeration, a cultural fixture. Presidents sat opposite him, celebrities lined up for his questions. Ordinary Americans felt they knew him. And yet, as history often proves, the pedestal can be as dangerous as it is high. The higher the climb, the harder the fall. You're left now, looking back, with a dual image. Matt Lauer, the steady anchor of American mornings, and Matt Lauer, the man whose unchecked power would soon unravel the empire built around him. You step behind the shimmering glass of Studio 1A, past the smiles, the mugs, and the morning cheer. Out there in front of the cameras, Matt Lauer was warmth itself. A practiced grin, a playful joke, a steady anchor who never seemed rattled by breaking news or celebrity antics. But once you slipped behind the curtain, the air shifted. Colleagues whispered about his intensity, about the chill that could creep in when the cameras went dark. This was the other side of the Today Show, the part most viewers never glimpsed, where the balance of power tilted heavily toward a single man. The world of morning television is, by design, a well-oiled machine. Producers, assistants, stagehands, all moving in harmony to make the 2-hour show look effortless. But within that machine, hierarchy rules. At NBC, few figures loomed larger than Matt Lauer. He could champion an idea or kill it with a glance. For those who worked closely with him, his approval meant opportunity. His disfavor could mean stagnation or a sudden end. Staffers recalled how he often demanded perfection, not just in timing, but in loyalty. If the cameras had to bend around his rhythm, so too at times did the people. One producer once joked that working for Lauer was like navigating an unpredictable forecast. Sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy, but always commanding the day. On lighter mornings, he was generous, warm, even fatherly. But on others, he could be cutting, brusque, and dismissive. Those mood swings, combined with his immense power, left many walking on eggshells. Investigators still question whether NBC executives, sitting just a few floors above, were truly unaware of the fear that occasionally trickled through the ranks. You imagine the contrast. Fans outside, pressed against the plaza's barriers, eager to catch a glimpse of Lauer's wave, while inside the walls of 30 Rock, some colleagues braced themselves for his temper. Yet no one dared speak too loudly. He was, after all, not just a host, but a brand. One that brought in millions of viewers and millions more in advertising revenue. At his peak, Today pulled in over $500 million annually for NBC. In such an environment, protecting the star became synonymous with protecting the bottom line. There's a quirky little detail about the studio that adds another layer to this picture. Staffers once said Lauer had a button installed under his desk, allowing him to remotely lock his office door. Officially, it was presented as a convenience, a security measure common for executives. But in the aftermath of his firing, that very button became symbolic, cited in reports as a troubling metaphor for the power dynamics inside the building. A button that closed doors, both literally and figuratively. Despite the undercurrents, the outer image never cracked. Viewers saw the banter with Katie Couric, the laughter with Al Roker, the occasional mock squabble that made the show feel like family. And that was the genius of it. Morning television thrives on intimacy. Lauer wasn't just a figure on screen. He was Matt. Viewers spoke of him by first name, as though he were a neighbor stopping by each day. That closeness gave him enormous sway, not just over the audience but within NBC itself. Behind the scenes, not everyone was charmed. Some younger staffers, especially women, described an uneasy culture, one in which power was lopsided and boundaries often blurred. The whispers rarely escaped the studio walls. They were the sort of murmurs that colleagues traded in hushed voices. Small incidents, offhand comments, the occasional remark that didn't sit right. Nothing yet explosive, nothing that made the front page. But the threads were there, woven into the fabric of the workplace. And yet, as you reflect, it's clear how carefully crafted the outer shell was. Lauer attended charity events, smiled in glossy magazine spreads, and even hosted specials that painted him as a trusted national figure. He wasn't just the Today Show's host, he was its identity. It's easy, in hindsight, to wonder how such duality could go unnoticed. But at the time, the image was seamless. This dissonance between the on-air warmth and backstage tension set the stage for what was to come. A man could hold America's trust in one hand and his colleagues' fear in the other. And investigators still question whether that imbalance, hidden in plain sight, was the most telling red flag of all. The spark that lit the fuse came quietly, the way many reckonings do. In November 2017, a female NBC employee stepped forward with a detailed complaint against Matt Lauer. Her story reached network executives directly, not through rumors or whispers, but as a formal report. She alleged that during the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics, while working abroad, Lauer engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior toward her. The allegations were specific, disturbing, and impossible for the company to brush aside. For years, he had been NBC's crown jewel, the face of their mornings, but in that moment, the network had no choice but to act. Within hours of the complaint landing on the desk of management, a decision was made that would reverberate across American media. Lauer was out. The announcement came the next morning, live on air, delivered by Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb. Their voices trembled as they explained to viewers that a colleague, a friend, and a man they had worked beside for years was being dismissed for what NBC called inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace. The statement was both swift and vague, offering few details, but its impact was seismic. For viewers sipping coffee across the country, the words shattered an illusion. The host they welcomed into their homes every morning had been removed overnight, without warning, for reasons serious enough to sever a decades-long career. NBC's internal handling of the complaint is still a subject of debate. Executives claimed it was the first time they had received a formal, detailed allegation against Lauer. They emphasized that the decision to fire him was made quickly and decisively, within less than 48 hours. Yet investigators still question whether the network had truly been blindsided. Whispers had circulated for years, unspoken stories among staff, rumors that never made it to formal complaints. Was this truly the first time NBC had heard something concrete? Or was it simply the first time the weight of an accuser's courage forced their hand? The timing of the complaint could not be separated from the broader cultural moment. The year 2017 was already a watershed, with the Harvey Weinstein revelations igniting the cheered Me Too movement. Women across industries, from Hollywood to politics to media, were stepping forward with stories that had long been buried. The social climate was shifting, and tolerance for silence was evaporating. NBC, aware of the scrutiny, could not afford to appear complicit. Lauer's firing wasn't just about one man, it was about optics, liability, and a network desperate to protect itself from the storm. For the woman who came forward, her bravery cracked a dam. Within days, more allegations surfaced. Some women recounted experiences of unwanted advances. Others described a culture of intimidation. Though details varied, a troubling pattern emerged. A narrative of power imbalance and misconduct stretching back years. What had once been whispers behind the studio glass became front-page headlines. There's a quirky detail from those days that illustrates the suddenness of it all. Lauer's nameplate was reportedly removed from his office door almost immediately, as if erasing him from the building's fabric could erase the scandal itself. Staff, who had seen him striding confidently through the halls one day, now walked past an empty space the next. The speed with which the network scrubbed his presence was symbolic. Matt Lauer, once indispensable, was now radioactive. For colleagues, the shock was twofold. On one hand, there was grief. The loss of a coworker they had shared laughter, holidays, and long broadcasts with. On the other, there was betrayal. Many wondered how much they hadn't known, how much had been hidden behind the polished veneer. For the public, the reaction was just as conflicted. Some defended Lauer, citing decades of trusted journalism. Others felt anger and disappointment, especially as more accounts surfaced. And yet, as you reflect, the most striking part of this moment isn't just the allegations themselves. It is the swiftness with which a career spanning more than 2 decades crumbled in less than 24 hours. One complaint, courageously voiced, had toppled a media empire that once seemed untouchable. The complaint that broke the silence didn't just end a career, it opened the floodgates. Imagine the scene inside NBC's executive offices that night. The complaint against Matt Lauer had just been delivered, carrying enough weight to shake the foundation of a billion-dollar franchise. The people in charge knew what was at stake: ratings, advertising revenue, the trust of viewers who treated today like a family member. Within hours, executives scrambled, holding tense meetings that stretched into the early morning. The network's most valuable star was suddenly its greatest liability. What do you do when the face of your mornings becomes a scandal? The decision was made quickly, almost surgically. By dawn, press releases were drafted, crisis management teams were activated, and Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb were briefed on what they would have to tell America. NBC wanted to present a clear message. This was swift, decisive action. They fired Lauer before the public even had time to process the rumors. That speed was unusual for a network often accused of moving cautiously. But this time, executives saw the writing on the wall. You can picture the chaos: phones buzzing, lawyers drafting statements, public relations experts calculating every word. For NBC, this wasn't just about removing Lauer, it was about protecting the institution. The Today Show wasn't simply another program. It was a flagship. A cash cow that generated more than $500 million in revenue each year. To let it sink under scandal would be catastrophic. So the network did what corporations often do when cornered. It distanced itself from the star it once exalted. There's a quirky little fact about those frantic hours. According to staffers, NBC's building crew reportedly stayed overnight, removing Lauer's nameplate and personal photos before most employees returned the next morning. The goal was clear: erase the traces, minimize the gossip, move forward as if the anchor had never occupied that office. Of course, such symbolic erasures only heightened the surreal atmosphere. A man who had been at the center of their world yesterday was now gone, as though he had evaporated into scandal. And yet, inside the building, not everyone agreed with the handling. Some employees questioned whether the network acted out of integrity or fear of exposure. If the rumors about Lauer had circulated quietly for years, why wait until now? Was NBC protecting staff or protecting its brand? Investigators still question whether executives had ignored red flags long before the Sochi complaint made ignorance impossible. On air, Guthrie and Kotba's announcement framed the firing as both painful and necessary. Guthrie even admitted, "This is a sad morning here at Today and at NBC News. We are processing it all." Their visible grief underlined the suddenness of it all. This wasn't a stranger being accused. It was their daily partner, their friend. The authenticity of their reaction softened the blow for viewers, but the shock remained. NBC's panic wasn't just about losing a star, it was about the broader storm sweeping through America in 2017. The Me Too movement was gaining momentum, and companies across industries were reckoning with allegations against powerful men. Harvey Weinstein's downfall had opened the floodgates, and media organizations knew their own walls might not be as sturdy as they once imagined. Firing Lauer swiftly allowed NBC to say, "We acted. We protected our employees. We did not cover this up." Whether or not that was fully true remained an open question. Behind closed doors, the ripple effect was immediate. Advertisers called with concerns. Producers scrambled to fill segments. Staffers whispered in hallways, trying to reconcile the Lauer they knew with the headlines unfurling across every major news outlet. Some were stunned. Others quietly admitted they weren't surprised. That division, shock versus recognition, revealed how differently people had experienced working alongside him. NBC's panic, though messy, achieved one thing: it cut ties cleanly. There were no long goodbyes, no farewell broadcasts, no tribute reels. In an instant, Matt Lauer was excised from the network he had defined. But the questions left behind lingered, and the world beyond NBC's walls was just beginning to demand answers. For a star who once seemed untouchable, the fall had begun in the cold, fluorescent-lit offices of his own network. And as you sit with the image of executives huddled around conference tables, drafting statements in the middle of the night, you realize the irony. The institution that had protected him for so long now scrambled to protect itself from him. The wave of allegations didn't stop with the Sochi complaint. It grew, spreading across media reports like wildfire. As journalists dug, more women came forward, each telling their own story of encounters with Matt Lauer that made the workplace uneasy, sometimes even unsafe. Some described unwanted advances, invitations to hotel rooms, or incidents that left them feeling exposed and vulnerable. Others recounted subtler pressures, comments meant to test boundaries, suggestions that compliance might advance a career, or warnings that resistance could hinder it. Though not all stories could be independently verified, patterns emerged that could not be ignored. The narrative was no longer about isolated incidents. It suggested a culture that allowed a single individual to operate with near impunity. For you, the accounts are chilling precisely because they contradict everything viewers saw on screen. Out front, Lauer was amiable, humorous, the approachable anchor who guided your mornings with charm and wit. Behind closed doors, according to accusers, the man could be predatory, calculating, and relentless. Investigators still question whether the full extent of this behavior was ever known to NBC before the formal complaint surfaced. How much of the culture was nurtured by silence, complicity, or fear? The media coverage painted a complex picture. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Time and other outlets reported multiple allegations, some dating back to the early 2000s. While the Sochi incident was central, the report suggested patterns of harassment and misconduct spanning years. Yet there were no public criminal charges filed, no court proceedings that could definitively adjudicate the truth of every claim. Lauer's public response was measured. He issued a statement apologizing for his behavior, acknowledging truths in the accounts, but disputing the most serious allegations. It was an apology that walked a tightrope, admitting wrongdoing while protecting himself legally. One striking facet of the narrative is the personal bravery of the accusers. Speaking out against a household name, especially one as powerful and protected as Lauer, carries immense risk. Many faced scrutiny, doubt, and public attention they had not sought. Their voices became central to the Me Too movement's expansion beyond Hollywood, illustrating how even institutions like NBC could be challenged by the courage of a single individual. You notice a subtle, almost ironic detail in the reporting. Lauer's office, once meticulously curated with photos, awards, and personal mementos, was swiftly cleared after his firing. It was as if the network tried to erase him physically while simultaneously grappling with the emotional and legal fallout. The act of removing his belongings became symbolic, a visual representation of a man who had fallen from the heights of morning television, leaving only questions in his wake. Beyond the immediate media storm, the allegations reshaped the internal culture at NBC. HR policies were reviewed, protocols for reporting misconduct were tightened, and executives were forced to confront uncomfortable questions about past decisions. How had complaints been handled in the past? Had power been allowed to shield behavior? Investigators still question whether structural failures within the network contributed to an environment where misconduct could go unchecked. For the public, the stories prompted debate. Could the man who had brought so much comfort into their homes be the same man accused by multiple women of predatory behavior? Could decades of professional success coexist with personal failings so serious? The contradiction was stark, forcing viewers to reconcile their perception of Matt Lauer with the new reality emerging from investigative reporting. Through it all, Lauer remained largely private, appearing only in carefully worded statements and rare interviews. The shift from public visibility to private retreat mirrored the collapse of his carefully curated image. The man who once seemed to belong in living rooms across the nation had vanished, leaving space for reflection, outrage, and a broader conversation about accountability in workplaces dominated by powerful figures. The accumulation of allegations didn't just end a career, it punctured the myth of invulnerability. The fall of a morning star became a lesson in the consequences of unchecked power, the courage required to speak out, and the fragility of public perception. Among the various allegations, one of the most widely discussed traced back to the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. Lauer had traveled with NBC to cover the event, his presence emblematic of the network's star power on the world stage. To viewers, he was reporting with poise and professionalism, bringing the games into living rooms with a practiced smile and insightful commentary. But behind the scenes, according to accusers, the trip included moments that crossed lines of workplace conduct, blurring the boundary between professional reporting and personal exploitation. A woman alleged that Lauer invited her to his hotel room under circumstances that made her uncomfortable, a situation emblematic of the power dynamics that would later define the scandal. For you, the stark contrast between Lauer's public and private personas becomes almost surreal. Out front, he embodied a trusted journalist guiding viewers through Olympic victories and defeats. Behind the cameras, allegations suggested behavior that exploited the imbalance of authority in the workplace. Investigators still question whether the Sochi incident was symptomatic of a longer pattern that had gone unaddressed, a harbinger of the downfall that would arrive 3 years later. Media outlets covered the Sochi allegations carefully, highlighting them as part of a broader narrative of misconduct rather than a singular event. While there were no criminal charges tied to the Olympics, The story gained traction because it connected a recognizable figure with a moment when professional duties should have outweighed personal indulgence. It became a focal point for discussions about how workplaces, especially in high-profile industries, enable certain behaviors to persist behind a veneer of normalcy. You might find it oddly humanizing, in a dark way, that even a star as polished as Lauer could falter during what seemed like routine reporting. Employees noted that while he could charm international athletes and dignitaries, the same charm often extended into private spaces in ways that left subordinates feeling uneasy. The paradox of the man, publicly professional, privately transgressive, underscores how reputation can be meticulously managed while misdeeds accumulate unnoticed. There's a quirky detail reported in entertainment press. Some staffers joked that Lauer carried a bag full of Olympic survival items to Sochi, ranging from extra ties to stress balls. On the surface, it seems benign, an eccentric reporter preparing for unpredictable live television. But in retrospect, the same meticulous attention to personal control hints at an individual accustomed to managing not just the narrative, but the environment and people around him. It's a small, almost trivial observation that gains weight in the context of allegations. The Sochi episode also revealed how isolated and pressured employees could feel. For staff traveling abroad, removed from the familiar support structures of the office, lines between professional and personal interactions could blur quickly. In a high-stakes, high-visibility setting, the imbalance of power could be amplified. Investigators still question whether the unique pressures of such assignments made it easier for misconduct to occur unchecked. Public perception, once the Olympics coverage aired, remained largely positive. Fans praised Lauer for his energy, his knowledge, and his effortless rapport with athletes. Few, if any, could have suspected that behind the scenes, shadows of misconduct were casting long, unacknowledged silhouettes. The dissonance between on-camera excellence and off-camera allegations demonstrates how carefully crafted public images can mask troubling realities. And so, the Sochi allegations became a pivotal reference point in the narrative. They illustrated that the story of Matt Lauer's fall wasn't treaty about a single day or a single complaint. It was about a long arc of behavior that culminated in public exposure. They also underscored a chilling truth. Even in high-profile, closely observed environments, power can be leveraged in ways that leave victims silent, audiences unaware, and institutions grappling with responsibility only after the fact. For you, reflecting on Sochi is a reminder of the fragility of trust. A figure so ingrained in your morning routine, so trusted and familiar, can harbor contradictions invisible from the outside. And in that gap between image and reality, the narrative of the fall begins to crystallize, showing how one man's choices, repeated over time, can ripple through an entire organization and reshape public perception. After the allegations became public, Matt Lauer issued a statement that walked an intricate tightrope, part apology, part defense. He admitted that certain behavior was wrong and expressed regret for causing pain to colleagues, but he disputed the most serious claims circulating in the media. The statement was carefully drafted, balancing acknowledgement with legal caution, a reflection of both the gravity of the accusations and his instinct for self-preservation. For you, it's a study in the complexity of public contrition. Words meant to appear remorseful can also shield, to some degree, the speaker from consequences. Lauer's response also highlighted the delicate tension between accountability and reputation management. Outwardly, he accepted responsibility for mistakes in judgment, framing them as lapses rather than systemic abuse. Yet he resisted admitting to acts characterized as predatory. Investigators still question whether this selective acknowledgement was sincere remorse or a tactical move to protect himself legally and financially. The public's reaction was equally divided. Some saw his words as a genuine attempt at atonement, while others interpreted them as deflection and minimization. The situation also exposed the broader challenge of celebrity apologies. Unlike private individuals, Lauer's actions were tied to a persona cultivated over decades. His on-screen charm, trusted voice, and professional accomplishments complicated the narrative, leaving viewers caught between admiration for past work and condemnation for alleged misconduct. How do you reconcile decades of public service with allegations of personal wrongdoing? This paradox fueled ongoing debate and kept the story alive in headlines long after the firing itself. Even in the midst of the storm, small human details punctuated the narrative. Lauer reportedly consulted his wife and legal team extensively before releasing the statement, reflecting the personal stakes involved. There was also an almost absurdly meticulous element. The statement's tone, phrasing, and structure were designed to avoid any words that could later be used against him in court or civil proceedings. It was a reminder that behind every public apology is a negotiation between image, truth, and risk. Internally, NBC remained under intense scrutiny. Executives were criticized for how the network had handled prior whispers of misconduct, and questions mounted about the speed and transparency of their response. Investigators still question whether Lauer's carefully managed statement was part of a broader negotiation with NBC aimed at mitigating potential lawsuits or reputational damage. The interplay between corporate protection and individual defense became a focal point for media analysis, illustrating how complex such high-profile scandals can become. The public's perception of Lauer shifted sharply. Where he was once seen as a trusted confidant of viewers' mornings, he now became emblematic of a larger discussion about power abuse in workplaces, the limits of celebrity, and the courage required for accusers to speak up. Lauer's carefully chosen words could not erase the reports or the witnesses, but they did complicate the narrative, forcing audiences to navigate a mix of acknowledgement, denial, and carefully curated remorse. A quirky anecdote from media coverage of the apology highlights the surreal aspect of celebrity accountability. Some fans noted the contrast between Lauer's poised, formal statement and the very human, almost awkward familiarity he once exuded on air. The shift from approachable morning host to legal-conscious spokesperson underscored the transformation of a public figure under scrutiny. It was a change so stark that it almost seemed theatrical. A man performing accountability for a nation watching. Ultimately, Lauer's apologies and denials became a mirror, reflecting the broader conversation about misconduct in high-profile environments. The words were necessary, but insufficient. The statements acknowledged personal responsibility in part, but left many questions unanswered. For you, as a listener, it's a lesson in the nuance of human behavior, the complexities of institutional response, and the delicate dance between remorse, reputation, and reality. The balance between acknowledgement and denial marked a turning point. The narrative was no longer just about scandal. It was about accountability, perception, and the limits of control when public and private worlds collide. As the story unfolded, the consequences extended beyond statements and headlines. They reached the courtroom of public opinion and the internal culture of NBC. Matt Lauer's departure sent shockwaves through the network, forcing executives to reassess not just policy, but the very environment in which such behavior could occur. HR protocols were overhauled, reporting mechanisms were tightened, and mandatory training on workplace conduct became a central focus. For you, it's striking to see how one individual's actions can catalyze institutional change, reshaping norms that had persisted for decades. The ripple effect was felt in the industry at large. Other networks began to examine their own cultures, questioning whether power hierarchies had enabled misconduct elsewhere. Lauer's fall was no longer just a personal story. It had become emblematic of a systemic issue within media, one that spurred conversation about accountability, transparency, and ethical responsibility. Investigators still question whether the speed of NBC's reforms adequately addressed the deeper cultural problems, or whether the changes were largely performative, motivated by the need to restore public trust. On a personal level, Lauer's relationships within the network suffered irreparable damage. Colleagues who had once worked alongside him daily now spoke cautiously or declined comment entirely. Public figures he had interviewed, partners in charity events, and even family members faced scrutiny by association. The social ecosystem of television, where visibility equates to influence, suddenly became a minefield of reputational risk. Every connection was filtered through the lens of scandal, and trust, once implicit, required careful rebuilding. A quirky, almost surreal element of the post-firing period involved the Today Show itself. Producers had to rapidly reconfigure segments, adjust schedules, and develop new on-air chemistry between co-hosts. Fans, accustomed to seeing Lauer's familiar presence, noticed the gaps, the pauses, the adjustments, the absence of a central anchor figure. The show survived, but it was a testament to how integral he had been and how disruptive his sudden exit proved to be. Public discourse continued to be heated. Social media amplified every revelation, and discussions often became polarized. Some defended Lauer, citing his decades of service and arguing that the allegations lacked legal adjudication. Others criticized the culture that allowed his behavior to go unchecked, emphasizing the courage of the women who came forward. For you, it's a reminder of how narratives can be contested, and how perception shapes the memory of events as much as the facts themselves. There's an underlying lesson here about the intersection of power, fame, and accountability. Lauer's influence wasn't just personal, it was structural. He held sway over ratings, over careers, over programming decisions, and, by extension, over the emotional landscape of millions of viewers. The consequences of that power, when misused, were not isolated. They reverberated across the organization, the industry, and the public consciousness. Investigators still question whether similar dynamics exist in other high-profile workplaces, hidden behind the glow of cameras and the charm of trusted personalities. Even in the midst of controversy, small human details punctuated the story. Employees spoke of Lauer's meticulous attention to timing, his habit of sending personal notes of encouragement to select colleagues, and his charisma that could charm audiences and staff alike. These details complicated the narrative, reminding you that people are rarely one-dimensional, capable of warmth, skill, and generosity while simultaneously exhibiting behaviors that harm others. By the end of 2017, Lauer's departure had become a touchstone for a cultural reckoning. His fall was not merely the result of one complaint, it was the culmination of years of unaddressed behavior, institutional complacency, and societal shifts demanding accountability. For viewers and media professionals alike, the story served as both a cautionary tale and a prompt for reflection. How could someone so trusted for so long harbor actions that ultimately undermined that very trust? In the quiet moments after the headlines fade, the lesson resonates. Power, when unchecked, can distort reality, warp relationships, and leave lasting consequences that ripple far beyond a single individual. The fall of Matt Lauer, the Morning Star, reminds you that public personas are never the full story, and that the courage to speak truth can change not only lives but entire institutions. Even after Lauer's termination, the media spotlight didn't dim. In fact, it intensified, shifting from immediate shock to deeper analysis of patterns, culture, and consequence. Journalists, columnists, and commentators dissected every detail: the timing of complaints, internal memos, and Lauer's public statements. They traced the arc of his career, juxtaposing his polished on-screen persona with allegations of misconduct behind closed doors. For you, this stage of the story is where narrative and accountability intersect, where the complexities of human behavior collide with institutional responsibility, and where viewers are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about power and trust. Investigators continued to examine NBC's internal policies and responses, asking pointed questions. Were there prior warnings that were ignored? Were whispers of misconduct dismissed to protect ratings or revenue? Investigators still question whether systemic failures within the network allowed a culture of silence to persist, enabling the environment in which Lauer's alleged behavior could occur unchecked. These inquiries didn't just target one man. They scrutinized the structural vulnerabilities of one of America's largest media institutions. Public response evolved, too. Social media became a forum for both support and criticism, amplifying voices that had once been marginalized. Hashtags and trending topics reflected a growing impatience with workplace misconduct in high-profile industries. For many viewers, Lauer's case became emblematic of a broader societal reckoning, an acknowledgement that fame, influence, and visibility can sometimes shield unethical behavior from scrutiny. There are also more subtle, almost humanizing aspects of this period. Some accounts described Lauer quietly mentoring junior staffers, offering career advice or words of encouragement. While these moments do not excuse or diminish allegations, they reveal the duality of human behavior, capable of warmth and generosity in some contexts while simultaneously engaging in harmful actions in others. Investigators still question whether this duality contributed to the network's hesitation in confronting earlier reports, complicating the internal calculus of risk and accountability. One detail that stands out is the logistical ripple effect within Today itself. Producers, anchors, and support staff had to rapidly reconfigure segments, redistribute responsibilities, and recalibrate the show's rhythm. The absence of a central anchor figure created a vacuum that was felt not only on camera, but also behind the scenes. Viewers noticed, fans speculated, and the show had to adapt while maintaining the familiar comfort of morning routines. It was a testament to both Lauer's former influence and the resilience of the production team. Simultaneously, Lauer's public image faced relentless scrutiny. Every past interview, every off-the-cuff remark, and every public appearance became fodder for analysis. Television appearances and magazine features from years prior were re-evaluated through the lens of the allegations, creating a sense of narrative recontextualization. For you, this process illustrates how public memory can be reshaped, not only by facts, but by the emergent interpretation of those facts in light of new revelations. NBC, meanwhile, was attempting damage control while fostering cultural change. Policies were revised, internal training programs implemented, and reporting mechanisms strengthened. The network sought to demonstrate both accountability and forward-thinking reform. Yet, investigators still question whether the measures went far enough, or if they primarily served to reassure a concerned public while leaving systemic challenges unresolved. There's a quirky anecdote that surfaced amid this scrutiny. During an internal review, it was noted that Lauer's desk calendar, once meticulously organized with appointments, interviews, and personal notes, was found to contain handwritten reminders that hinted at interactions some might now view differently. Small, mundane details like this suddenly became symbolic, casting light on the intersection between routine behavior and power dynamics. By this stage, Lauer's story had transcended the individual. It was a lesson in accountability, a cautionary tale of unchecked influence, and a reflection of society's evolving standards. For viewers and industry professionals alike, the scandal forced a reckoning. How do institutions balance talent with ethics, reputation with responsibility, and public image with private conduct? In these post-firing months, the narrative solidified. Matt Lauer was no longer simply a trusted morning host. He had become a symbol of both the allure and the peril of fame, the consequences of power, and the imperative for accountability in workplaces that are often dominated by a single figure. The fall of a morning star was complete, but the echoes, lessons, questions, and societal implications continued to resonate. As the dust settled, Matt Lauer's career lay in ruins, but the reverberations continued across media, public discourse, and personal lives. Networks began auditing culture and procedures more rigorously, drawing lessons from the NBC experience. Lauer's departure became a blueprint, or warning for organizations grappling with high-profile misconduct, illustrating how quickly fame can turn into liability when ethical boundaries are crossed. For you, it's a stark reminder that power, influence, and public trust can vanish almost overnight, leaving a complicated legacy in their wake. The broader cultural implications were profound. Lauer's firing contributed momentum to the huge Me Too movement, reinforcing a shift in societal expectations. Women in workplaces far removed from television began to share experiences, emboldened by the visibility of his fall. Investigators still question whether the exposure of a single figure like Lauer triggered deeper accountability within industries previously insulated from scrutiny. What was once dismissed as rumor or office gossip became actionable concern, demonstrating the transformative potential of speaking out. Within NBC, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Colleagues spoke of heightened awareness, increased caution in interactions, and a new emphasis on transparency. Policies were rewritten, mandatory training sessions became standard, and leadership teams engaged in open discussions about power dynamics. Yet there was also tension, an undercurrent of mistrust and retrospection. Employees questioned how so many warning signs could have been overlooked for so long, and how a single individual could accumulate unchecked influence over a major network. A quirky yet telling anecdote involved the replacement process for Lauer's role on Today. Producers experimented with rotating co-hosts, testing new dynamics to maintain audience engagement while stabilizing morale among staff. The series of adjustments was both practical and symbolic. The network was signaling that no one was irreplaceable and that culture, not star power, should define the workplace. These behind-the-scenes adjustments, though minor in isolation, collectively represented an institutional attempt at rehabilitation. Public memory of Lauer became a mix of admiration, disappointment, and caution. Viewers remembered the countless mornings when his calm demeanor guided them through news, interviews, and laughter. But those recollections were now tempered by allegations and revelations of misconduct. For you, the juxtaposition is instructive. Public perception and private behavior often exist on parallel tracks, only colliding when events expose hidden realities. Even Lauer's family and personal relationships were deeply affected. Marital strain, privacy concerns, and public scrutiny intensified in the aftermath of allegations. Media outlets speculated about personal consequences, though details were largely kept private to respect those not directly involved. The narrative was no longer solely about professional failure. It encompassed human cost, emotional fallout, and societal lessons about the consequences of misusing power. Investigators still question how personal accountability intersects with public accountability, and what the long-term implications might be for those caught in the ripple effects. The Lauer scandal also had a peculiar, almost surreal component in the way nostalgia clashed with current perception. Clips of him laughing with celebrities, co-hosting playful segments, or presenting news now carried a shadow. Moments once emblematic of trust and warmth became ambiguous, tinged with suspicion or disappointment. This duality, charm and alleged misconduct intertwined, exemplified the dissonance that often accompanies high-profile falls from grace. Finally, the case reinforced a critical societal lesson. Systems and individuals must be vigilant. Power is not inherently corrupting, but unchecked, it enables behavior that can harm others and destabilize organizations. Matt Lauer's story, from Morning Star to Cautionary Tale, illustrates that fame can be fleeting, influence can be misused, and accountability, while delayed, ultimately reshapes both personal and institutional legacies. By 2018, the story of Matt Lauer had entered a reflective phase. The initial shock of his firing and the flurry of allegations had subsided, replaced by analysis, lessons learned, and ongoing conversations about workplace culture. Lauer himself largely retreated from public life, avoiding interviews and appearances, while the media documented both the immediate fallout and its long-term implications. For you, it's a moment to consider how quickly the arc of a public figure Asher's life can pivot, from trusted anchor to emblem of accountability, and how the public narrative continues to evolve even after headlines fade. The institutional response remained a key point of discussion. NBC undertook sweeping reforms, reinforcing reporting structures, mandating ethics training, and cultivating transparency in ways that hadn't existed previously. Investigators still question whether these changes were fully comprehensive or partially performative, but they undeniably reshaped the internal environment. For staffers, the lessons were immediate and personal. Speak up, document, and understand that power does not exempt anyone from scrutiny. Lauer's fall became both cautionary and instructive. The cultural resonance extended beyond NBC. Across the television industry and beyond, the story fueled dialogue about consent, harassment, and accountability. It emboldened others to share their experiences and prompted leaders to reconsider how they wield influence over colleagues and subordinates. While Lauer's professional career was effectively over, his impact on workplace ethics was profound, serving as a reminder that high-profile failures can catalyze systemic change. Quirky details persisted, too. Staffers recalled Lauer's once meticulous routines, from color-coded calendars to on-air gestures, now almost fetishized in stories about his precision and control. These small human habits contrasted sharply with the allegations of misconduct, highlighting the duality of personality and the contrast between competence and ethical failure. Investigators still question whether this duality was consciously masked, a strategy to maintain a flawless public image while private actions diverged from public perception. Public memory continued to wrestle with nuance. Fans remembered decades of journalism, interviews, and morning cheer, now shaded by accounts of alleged misconduct. The complexity of human behavior became unavoidable. One could admire professional skill while condemning ethical lapses. Lauer's story illustrated how closely success, influence, and moral responsibility are entwined, and how quickly that equilibrium can collapse when one element is compromised. For those reflecting on the scandal, a broader lesson emerged. Accountability is inescapable, even for those at the pinnacle of fame. Power can provide comfort, control, and opportunity, but it also carries responsibility. When misused, the consequences reverberate widely, affecting colleagues, organizations, audiences, and personal legacies. Investigators still question whether similar figures exist elsewhere, waiting for systems and individuals alike to catch up. The final, quiet detail of this narrative is perhaps the most human. Lauer's withdrawal from public life left an empty space in television morning routines, a reminder that while faces and voices can vanish overnight, the lessons of their fall remain. And in that absence, the story of accountability, courage, and institutional reckoning resonates with enduring clarity. The saga of Matt Lauer, from the pinnacle of morning television to his sudden, shocking fall, reminds you that appearances can deceive, that silence can enable, and that courage, from those willing to speak out, can reshape history. The morning star may have fallen, but the lessons linger, guiding institutions, individuals, and viewers alike toward a more vigilant, conscientious understanding of power and responsibility. Now, as the story of Matt Lauer settles into reflection, you can let the tension ease, drawing a deep, slow breath. The narrative of his rise and fall is as much about systems and culture as it is about an individual. For decades, he was the familiar face guiding mornings, a symbol of trust and professionalism, and yet behind that polished persona lay complexities, allegations, and a cautionary tale about power and accountability. By understanding the dualities, public image versus private actions, charm versus misconduct, you gain insight not just into Lauer's life, but into the intricate dynamics that shape workplaces, media, and trust. In these quieter moments, consider the courage it took for accusers to come forward, the rapid recalibration of a major network, and the broader societal shifts ignited by this story. Change often arrives in the wake of discomfort, forcing reflection and reform. And while headlines fade, the lessons endure. Accountability is non-negotiable. Ethical responsibility is crucial, and no one, however familiar or influential, is beyond scrutiny. So, as you settle in, let the narrative of Matt Lauer's fall remind you of the impermanence of fame, the weight of responsibility, and the importance of vigilance in the spaces where power resides. Carry the reflection gently, letting the story guide your thoughts on trust, human behavior, and the subtle, pervasive influence of accountability. In the end, the morning star may have fallen, but its echo shapes the path forward, inviting awareness, introspection, and a quiet resolve to act ethically, even when no one is watching.